The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty training ground as Colonel Martinez surveyed his depleted unit. 3 weeks had passed since the ambush that claimed their best marksman, and the enemy was closing in on their position. Intelligence reports suggested a coordinated attack was imminent, and without proper sniper support, his men were sitting ducks in the exposed valley. Sarah Chen sat quietly in the corner of the mess tent, methodically cleaning her standard-issue rifle, while the other soldiers discussed their dire situation. At 19, she was the youngest member of the reconnaissance unit, having joined the military straight out of high school when her family lost their farm to bankruptcy. Her slight frame and reserved demeanor had earned her the nickname Mouse among the troops, though she never complained about it. The conversation around the makeshift table grew heated as Sergeant Rodriguez slammed his fist down. "We need a replacement sniper, and we need one fast. Command says they can't spare anyone from the main force." His weathered face showed the strain of leading men who might not survive the week. Private Johnson, a burly man from Texas, shook his head grimly. "Thompson was the best shot I ever seen. Picked off targets at 800 yards like they was tin cans. How we supposed to replace that?" Sarah continued her methodical cleaning, her small hands working with practiced precision. She had grown up on her grandfather's farm in rural Montana, where hunting wasn't just a hobby but a necessity for putting food on the table. Her grandfather, a veteran of 3 wars, had taught her to shoot before she could properly hold a rifle. By age 12, she was bringing down deer with single shots at distances that impressed even the local hunters. "Maybe we could rig some kind of automated system," suggested Corporal Williams, though his voice lacked conviction. "Set up crossfire patterns, use the terrain to our advantage." Lieutenant Foster, fresh from officer training, nodded enthusiastically. "That could work. We establish overlapping fields of fire, create kill zones." His theoretical knowledge showed through his words, but the experienced soldiers exchanged knowing glances. "Kid's been reading too many textbooks," Rodriguez muttered under his breath. "Real combat ain't like the simulators." The discussion continued for another hour, growing more desperate as each suggestion proved impractical. Their position in the valley offered excellent defensive advantages, but only with proper sniper support to control the high ground approaches. Without it, they were trapped in what could easily become their tomb. Sarah finished cleaning her rifle and quietly gathered her equipment. As she stood to leave, Rodriguez called out, "Mouse, you got any bright ideas? You've been mighty quiet over there." She paused at the tent entrance, her dark eyes meeting his for a brief moment. "Maybe I could help," she said softly, her voice barely audible over the desert wind. Johnson let out a harsh laugh. "No offense, Mouse, but we need someone who can actually hit what they're aiming at. This ain't target practice." Sarah's jaw tightened slightly, but she simply nodded and left the tent. Outside, she walked to the edge of their perimeter, where Private Kelly was struggling with his rifle scope. The young soldier had been having trouble with his weapon since the last supply drop, and his frustration was evident. "Mind if I take a look?" Sarah asked, kneeling beside him. Kelly shrugged, handing over the rifle. "Thing's been shooting left all week. Armorer says it's fine, but I can't hit anything beyond 200 yards. Sarah examined the scope mounts with careful attention, her fingers finding the loose screws that the armorer had missed. "Your rear mounts come loose," she explained, producing a small screwdriver from her kit. "Probably from the vibrations when we moved positions last week." As she worked, Kelly watched her precise movements with growing interest. "You seem to know your way around weapons pretty well for a supply clerk." "My grandfather taught me," Sarah replied, making minute adjustments to the scope. "He always said a weapon is only as good as the person maintaining it." She handed the rifle back and pointed to a rock formation about 300 yards away. "Try that boulder with the white mark on it." Kelly shouldered the weapon, took aim, and fired. The bullet struck dead center of the white mark, sending up a small puff of dust. His eyes widened in surprise. "How did you know exactly what was wrong?" "Same problem happened to my hunting rifle when I was 14, Sarah explained. "Took me 3 missed shots at a deer before I figured it out." Word of Sarah's technical skills spread quickly through the small unit. Over the next few days, soldiers began approaching her with various weapon malfunctions and maintenance issues. She solved each problem with quiet efficiency, never drawing attention to herself but earning the respect of her fellow troops. The enemy activity increased daily, with reconnaissance drones spotted at greater frequency and intercepted communications suggesting an attack was imminent. The tension in camp was palpable as men cleaned their weapons obsessively and checked their ammunition counts repeatedly. It was during the evening equipment check that Sergeant Rodriguez made a disturbing discovery. "Sir, we got a problem," he reported to Colonel Martinez. "Our remaining long-range ammunition is running low. If we get into a prolonged engagement, we might not have enough to keep the enemy at distance." The colonel studied the supply manifest with growing concern. "How much do we have for precision shooting?" "Maybe 50 rounds of the good stuff," Rodriguez replied. "Enough for a day's fighting if we're lucky." Sarah overheard the conversation from her position near the radio equipment. She knew that 50 rounds wouldn't last long in a sustained engagement, especially if they faced the coordinated attack that intelligence suggested was coming. Each shot would need to count, and there would be no room for error. That night, she lay awake in her sleeping bag, staring up at the star-filled desert sky. The weight of their situation pressed down on her like a physical force. These men had become her family over the past months, and the thought of losing them to poor marksmanship when she might be able to help gnawed at her conscience. The next morning brought disturbing news. A patrol had spotted enemy scouts on the eastern ridge, confirming that their position had been compromised. The attack would come soon, probably within the next 24 hours, and they were running out of time to prepare. Colonel Martinez called an emergency meeting, his face grim as he addressed his soldiers. "Gentlemen, it looks like we're going to have company. Intelligence suggests a full assault by tomorrow evening, with at least 60 hostiles approaching from multiple directions." The men listened in tense silence as he outlined their defensive strategy. Every position had been assigned, every field of fire calculated, but everyone understood the critical weakness in their plan. "Sir," Rodriguez spoke up, "without sniper support, we can't cover the northern approach effectively. If they get machine guns up on that ridge, we'll be pinned down with no way out." The colonel nodded grimly. "I'm aware of the problem, Sergeant. We'll have to make do with what we have." As the meeting broke up, Sarah remained seated while the other soldiers filed out to prepare their positions. The colonel noticed her hesitation and approached her table. "Something on your mind, Chen?" She looked up at him with those quiet, serious eyes that seemed older than her years. "Sir, I might be able to help with the sniper situation." Colonel Martinez studied her for a long moment. He had noticed her technical skills with weapons and her calm demeanor under pressure. But sniper work required more than just mechanical knowledge. "What kind of experience do you have with long-range shooting?" "I've been hunting since I was 8 years old," Sarah replied quietly. "My grandfather trained me. Before I enlisted, I could consistently hit targets at 600 yards with iron sights." The colonel's eyebrows rose slightly. "That's quite a claim, Chen." "But combat shooting is different from hunting. Have you ever shot at another human being?" Sarah shook her head honestly. "No, sir, I haven't, but I understand what needs to be done." For several minutes, the colonel considered her words. His unit was facing annihilation without proper sniper support, and conventional solutions weren't available. Sometimes desperate situations required unconventional decisions. "Tell you what, Chen," he finally said, "if you can prove you have the skills you claim, I'll consider it. But I'm not sending anyone into a sniper position based on hunting stories." Sarah nodded, understanding completely. "What kind of proof do you need, sir?" The colonel smiled grimly. "Be at the range in 1 hour. Bring whatever you think you'll need." The makeshift range buzzed with activity as word spread that the quiet supply clerk was going to attempt a shooting demonstration. Soldiers abandoned their preparations to witness what many assumed would be an embarrassing failure. Sarah Chen walked steadily toward the firing line, carrying Thompson's precision rifle that Colonel Martinez had authorized for the test. Sergeant Rodriguez had set up targets at various distances, starting at 300 yards and extending to 800 yards, where their fallen sniper had made his legendary shots. The farthest target was barely visible to the naked eye, a small steel plate that rang like a bell when struck. "This should be interesting," Johnson muttered to Kelly. "Mouse is about to learn the difference between shooting rabbits and real precision work." Sarah ignored the whispered comments and low chuckles from the assembled soldiers. She had faced skepticism before, growing up as the only girl in her grandfather's hunting group. The men there had learned to respect her abilities, and she hoped these soldiers would do the same, though she understood their doubts. Colonel Martinez handed her a box of premium match-grade ammunition, the same type Thompson had used for his longest shots. 20 rounds, he said simply. Show me what you can do. Sarah knelt beside the rifle, taking her time to familiarize herself with its weight and balance. Thompson had customized the weapon extensively, adding a specialized scope and adjusting the trigger pull to his preferences. She would need to adapt quickly to his modifications while accounting for the desert conditions that could affect bullet trajectory. The wind was steady but manageable, coming from the northeast at approximately 8 miles per hour. Sarah wet her finger and held it up, confirming her estimate before making the first sight adjustments. The temperature was climbing toward the day's peak, which would thin the air and slightly increase bullet velocity. Take your time, Chen, Colonel Martinez said quietly. But remember, in combat, you won't have the luxury of perfect conditions. Sarah nodded and settled into position behind the rifle. The familiar weight of a precision weapon felt comfortable in her hands, reminding her of countless hours spent with her grandfather in the Montana wilderness. He had taught her that shooting was as much mental as physical, requiring absolute focus and emotional control. The first target was at 300 yards, a standard bullseye pattern that any competent marksman should hit consistently. Sarah controlled her breathing, waiting for the natural pause between heartbeats when her body was most stable. The rifle fired with a sharp crack, and the spotter's scope immediately confirmed a center hit. Lucky shot, someone whispered, but Sarah was already working the bolt and settling into position for the second target. The 400-yard target fell with another center hit, followed quickly by clean strikes at 500 and 600 yards. Each shot demonstrated not just accuracy but consistency, with bullet holes grouping tightly around the center of each target. The crowd of observers grew quieter as Sarah continued her demonstration. Even the skeptics were beginning to realize they were witnessing something exceptional. Her movements were economical and precise, with no wasted motion or visible tension. 700 yards, Rodriguez called out, his voice carrying a note of respect that hadn't been there before. This target was a steel silhouette, designed to simulate an enemy soldier at extreme range. The distance made precise shot placement crucial, as even a small error would result in a complete miss. Sarah studied the target through the scope, noting the heat shimmer rising from the desert floor that could distort her aim. She waited for the wind to settle into a consistent pattern, then took the shot. The steel silhouette rang clearly, struck center mass with enough force to knock it backward. The assembled soldiers exchanged impressed glances as Sarah smoothly worked the bolt and prepared for the final target, 800 yards. Colonel Martinez announced personally. This is where Thompson made his reputation. The target was another steel plate, smaller than the others, and positioned at the maximum effective range of the rifle. At this distance, factors like ammunition temperature, barrel harmonics, and even the rotation of the earth could affect bullet trajectory. Most soldiers couldn't even see the target clearly without magnification. Sarah took extra time studying the conditions, noting how the wind patterns changed at different distances and adjusting her scope accordingly. This shot would require perfect technique and a considerable amount of luck, even for an experienced marksman. The desert fell silent, except for the whisper of wind across the sand. Sarah controlled her breathing, finding that perfect moment of stillness that separated good shots from exceptional ones. The rifle fired, its report echoing across the valley. For several seconds, nobody spoke as the spotter struggled to confirm the hit at such extreme range. Then Rodriguez's voice cut through the silence with barely contained amazement. Dead center. Perfect hit. The crowd of soldiers erupted in cheers and applause, their earlier skepticism replaced by genuine admiration. Even Johnson approached with an extended hand and a sheepish grin. I owe you an apology, Mouse. That was some of the finest shooting I ever witnessed. Colonel Martinez studied Sarah with new eyes, recognizing the calm competence that marked truly gifted individuals. Where did you learn to shoot like that, Chen? My grandfather was a Marine sniper in Vietnam, Sarah replied, her voice still quiet despite her impressive demonstration. He taught me that shooting is mostly patience and discipline. The actual trigger pull is the easiest part. And you've never had formal military training for this kind of work? Sarah shook her head. Just hunting and informal practice, but I understand the principles are the same. The colonel nodded slowly, weighing the risks against the desperate situation facing his unit. A gifted amateur was still preferable to no sniper support at all, and Sarah had just demonstrated skills that matched their fallen expert. Chen, I'm going to offer you a field promotion to specialist and assignment as our designated marksman. But I need you to understand what you're accepting. This isn't hunting deer in Montana. You'll be shooting at human beings who are trying to kill your friends. Sarah met his gaze steadily. I understand, sir. These men have become my family. I'll do whatever it takes to protect them. Over the next several hours, Sergeant Rodriguez worked with Sarah to familiarize her with advanced tactical shooting techniques. While her marksmanship was undeniable, combat situations required additional skills like range estimation, target prioritization, and coordinated fire support. In a firefight, you might have multiple targets presenting themselves simultaneously, Rodriguez explained as they walked the defensive perimeter. You have to decide quickly which pose the greatest threat to your team. Sarah absorbed the instruction eagerly, asking pertinent questions that demonstrated her understanding of the tactical concepts. Her background in hunting had taught her to think strategically about positioning and concealment, skills that translated well to military applications. As evening approached, the final preparations intensified. Sarah was assigned to an elevated position on the western ridge that offered excellent fields of fire over the most likely enemy approach routes. The position had been prepared for Thompson before his death, complete with camouflage shooting positions and pre-calculated range cards. Remember, Rodriguez advised as they inspected the sniper hide, your job isn't to get the most kills. It's to disrupt their advance and protect our people. Sometimes the threat of accurate fire is more valuable than the fire itself. Sarah nodded, understanding the psychological warfare aspect of sniper operations. A single accurate shot could pin down an entire squad, forcing them to seek cover and disrupting their coordinated attack. Private Williams, who had been assigned as her spotter, helped carry ammunition and communication equipment to the position. Despite his youth, he had excellent eyes and a steady temperament that made him valuable for the role. You really think they'll come tonight? Williams asked as they arranged their equipment. Intelligence says tomorrow evening at the earliest, Sarah replied, checking her rifle for the 100th time. But we need to be ready regardless. The sun set over the desert with spectacular colors, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that reminded Sarah of evenings on her grandfather's farm. For a moment, she allowed herself to remember simpler times when the only targets she faced were game animals and paper bullseyes. Colonel Martinez visited their position just before full darkness, bringing final intelligence updates and last-minute instructions. Enemy strength is estimated at 60 to 80 hostiles, approaching from multiple directions. Your primary responsibility is the northern approach where they could establish machine gun positions. Understood, sir, Sarah replied. What's our ammunition allocation? 50 rounds of match grade plus whatever standard ammunition you can use effectively. Make every shot count, Chen. Once this starts, there won't be any resupply. As the colonel departed, Sarah settled into the shooting position and began her watch. The desert night was surprisingly cold after the heat of the day, and she pulled her jacket closer while maintaining her vigil. Williams dozed fitfully beside her, the radio crackling occasionally with position reports from other defensive positions. The waiting was always the hardest part, giving her mind time to consider what she had committed to do. At midnight, the radio crackled with urgent communication. All positions, we have movement on the eastern perimeter. Estimate 20 hostiles approaching through the ravine. Sarah adjusted her position to cover the northern approach while staying alert to the developing situation. The attack was beginning earlier than expected, and she would soon discover if her shooting demonstration had prepared her for actual combat. The first gunshots shattered the desert silence at 030 hours, erupting from the eastern perimeter where enemy scouts had attempted to infiltrate the camp. Sarah Chen jolted to full alertness, her hands automatically checking her rifle while her eyes scanned the northern approach through her scope. Contact east! Contact east! Rodriguez's voice crackled through the radio. Multiple hostiles advancing through the ravine. Request immediate support. Williams grabbed the radio handset, his voice steady despite his obvious nervousness. Sniper position reports ready. Northern approach remains clear. Sarah adjusted her position slightly, maintaining her assigned field of fire while staying aware of the developing battle. The Eastern engagement was drawing the attention of the entire defensive force, which could be exactly what the enemy wanted if this was a coordinated attack. Muzzle flashes lit up the darkness below as the defensive positions engaged the infiltrators. The sound of automatic weapons fire echoed off the canyon walls, punctuated by the deeper boom of grenades and the sharp crack of precision rifles. Sarah could see tracer rounds streaking through the darkness like deadly fireflies. Movement on the North Ridge, Williams suddenly hissed, pointing toward a series of rocky outcroppings about 600 yards away. I count at least 6 figures advancing along the ridgeline. Sarah swung her rifle toward the indicated position, her eye finding the scope as naturally as breathing. Through the magnified optics, she could make out dark shapes moving carefully between the rocks, trying to use the cover to mask their approach. "Confirmed," she whispered into the radio. 6 hostiles on North Ridge range 600 yards. They appear to be carrying heavy weapons. Colonel Martinez's voice immediately responded. "Engage at your discretion, Specialist. Don't let them establish a firing position." Sarah's heart pounded as she settled the crosshairs on the lead figure. This would be her first shot at another human being, and despite all her training and preparation, the moment felt surreal. The figure in her scope was someone's son, possibly someone's father, but he was also carrying a weapon that could kill her friends. She controlled her breathing and waited for the natural respiratory pause her grandfather had taught her years ago. The rifle fired with its familiar sharp crack, and through the scope, she saw the lead figure stumble and fall behind the rocks. "First target down," Williams reported, his voice filled with professional approval. "Good shot." The remaining figures immediately scattered for cover, but their movement revealed their positions to Sarah's experienced eye. She worked the bolts smoothly and acquired the second target, a man attempting to set up what looked like a machine gun on a stable firing position. The second shot struck center mass, and the heavy weapon tumbled from the rocks into the ravine below. The psychological impact was immediate, as the remaining hostiles abandoned their advance and sought deeper cover. 2 down, Sarah reported, surprised by how steady her own voice sounded. Remaining targets have taken cover but appear to be regrouping. The eastern firefight was intensifying, with enemy forces pressing hard against the main defensive line. Sarah could hear Rodriguez shouting orders over the radio, coordinating the defense while requesting additional ammunition for his machine gun positions. Suddenly, Williams grabbed her arm and pointed toward a different section of the northern ridge. "New contacts. Looks like a flanking movement about 800 yards out." Sarah shifted her position and spotted the new threat immediately. A team of enemy soldiers was attempting to use the distraction of the eastern attack to establish a position on the high ground that would overlook the entire defensive perimeter. "I see them," she confirmed, adjusting her scope for the increased range. 4 hostiles with what appears to be a recoilless rifle. The recoilless rifle posed a significant threat to the defensive positions below. A single well-placed shot could destroy a bunker and kill multiple defenders, potentially breaking the entire defensive line. Sarah studied the target through her scope, noting the wind conditions and the increased range that would make this shot significantly more challenging. The enemy team was moving carefully but purposefully, apparently confident that they were beyond effective rifle range. She took extra time to calculate the shot, adjusting for the wind and the trajectory drop at 800 yards. The lead figure was setting up the recoilless rifle while his teammates provided security, unaware that they were under observation. "Take the shot when ready," Colonel Martinez's voice urged through the radio. "They're almost in position to engage our bunkers." Sarah found her natural respiratory pause and squeezed the trigger with steady pressure. The rifle fired, and after what seemed like an eternity, she saw the figure operating the heavy weapon collapse forward. The remaining 3 enemy soldiers immediately began retreating, abandoning the heavy weapon and seeking cover in the rocky terrain. Sarah managed to engage one more target before they disappeared completely, disrupting what could have been a devastating attack on the defensive positions. "Threat neutralized," she reported. "Heavy weapon abandoned, remaining hostiles in retreat." "Outstanding work, Specialist," Colonel Martinez responded. "Maintain your position and continue surveillance." The eastern battle was reaching its climax as the enemy assault intensified. Sarah could see muzzle flashes and explosions lighting up the darkness as both sides committed their full strength to the engagement. The sound of wounded soldiers calling for medics drifted across the desert night. Williams monitored the radio communications while Sarah maintained her watch on the northern approaches. The coordination between spotter and shooter was developing naturally, with Williams providing crucial intelligence while Sarah focused on target engagement. "Sniper position. This is command." The radio crackled urgently. "We have reports of enemy reinforcements approaching from the northwest. Can you provide surveillance and interdiction?" Sarah turned her attention to the indicated direction, scanning through her scope for any sign of movement. The northwest approach was more challenging terrain, with numerous gullies and rock formations that could conceal advancing troops. "Searching northwest sector," she reported. "No visual contact yet." Minutes passed with agonizing slowness as Sarah methodically scanned every potential hiding spot. The eastern battle was obviously draining the defensive ammunition supplies, and another coordinated attack could overwhelm their positions. Then Williams spotted them first. "There," he whispered urgently. 12 o'clock, about 700 yards. I count at least 10 hostiles moving through the wash. Sarah acquired the targets immediately, recognizing the threat they represented. This was a substantial force, probably the main enemy assault team using the eastern attack as a diversion to position themselves for a decisive strike. "Confirmed," she reported. "Large enemy force approaching through northwest wash. Estimate 10 to 12 hostiles with heavy equipment. Engage immediately," came the immediate response. "Do not allow them to reach assault positions." Sarah began engaging targets systematically, prioritizing those carrying heavy weapons or appearing to direct the movement. Her shots were deliberate and accurate, each one carefully aimed to maximize the disruption of the enemy formation. The enemy force quickly realized they were under accurate fire and attempted to disperse, but the confining terrain of the wash limited their options. Sarah continued engaging targets of opportunity, forcing them to seek cover, and disrupting their coordinated advance. "Multiple targets engaged," she reported between shots. "Enemy advance has been halted." The psychological impact of accurate sniper fire was becoming apparent as the enemy forces struggled to maintain their assault coordination. Units that had been advancing confidently were now pinned down by the threat of precision fire from an unseen shooter. Williams proved invaluable as a spotter, identifying new threats and calling out range estimates that saved precious seconds in target acquisition. His steady temperament under fire impressed Sarah, who had worried about working with an inexperienced partner. As dawn began to lighten the eastern sky, the intensity of the battle gradually diminished. The enemy forces were withdrawing to regroup, having failed to achieve their objective of overrunning the defensive positions during the night assault. "All positions report," Colonel Martinez called over the radio. "Casualty reports and ammunition status." The responses painted a picture of a successful defense, though at significant cost. Several soldiers had been wounded in the eastern engagement, and ammunition supplies were running dangerously low across all positions. "Sniper position reports 4 confirmed kills, multiple targets engaged," Sarah reported when her turn came. "Remaining ammunition, 37 rounds match grade, plus standard ammunition reserve." "Excellent work, Specialist Chen," the colonel responded. "Your interdiction prevented what could have been a breakthrough on our northern flank." As full daylight revealed the battlefield, Sarah could see the evidence of the night's engagement scattered across the desert floor. Enemy equipment lay abandoned where her accurate fire had forced hasty retreats, and the northern approaches remained secure. Williams was grinning despite his obvious exhaustion. "You know, Mouse, I don't think anyone's going to question your shooting abilities after this." Sarah managed a tired smile as she continued scanning for potential threats. The night battle had been successful, but she understood that larger enemy forces were probably regrouping for another assault. Her real test was yet to come. The afternoon sun blazed mercilessly overhead as Sarah Chen maintained her vigil from the sniper position. Intelligence reports indicated that enemy forces were massing for a final coordinated assault, this time with overwhelming numbers and heavy weapons that had been brought up during the morning hours. Colonel Martinez climbed to her position personally, his face grim as he surveyed the battlefield through binoculars. "Chen, I'm going to be straight with you. Reconnaissance shows at least 150 hostiles positioning for a simultaneous attack from 3 directions. They've learned from last night's failure. Sarah nodded, checking her remaining ammunition for the dozenth time. 37 rounds of match-grade ammunition wouldn't last long against such numbers, but she understood her role in the defensive plan. "What's the withdrawal plan, sir?" Williams asked, voicing the question they were all thinking. "There isn't one," the colonel replied bluntly. "This position is too strategically important to abandon, and we don't have the mobility to outrun that many hostiles across open desert. We hold here, or we don't go home at all." The weight of those words settled over the sniper team as they prepared for what might be their final engagement. Sarah cleaned her rifle one more time, ensuring that every shot would count when the battle began. Over the next 2 hours, they watched enemy forces positioning themselves with professional precision. Machine gun teams established overlapping fields of fire. Mortar crews registered their weapons on the defensive positions, and assault teams moved into final attack positions. "They're not taking any chances this time," Williams observed, studying the enemy deployment through spotting scope. "This looks like a textbook combined arms assault." Sarah tracked individual targets through her scope, memorizing their positions and identifying priority threats. The enemy had learned to respect her capabilities and were maintaining greater distances, but they would have to advance eventually if they wanted to overrun the position. At 1700, the enemy bombardment began with a fury that shook the entire valley. Mortar rounds and rocket-propelled grenades rained down on the defensive positions, forcing the defenders deep into their bunkers and disrupting communications. All positions, Rodriguez's voice fought through the radio static. "Incoming artillery. Take cover immediately." Sarah and Williams pressed themselves against the reinforced walls of their sniper hide as explosions bracketed their position. The enemy had clearly identified the sniper threat and were making a concentrated effort to eliminate it before beginning their ground assault. The bombardment continued for 20 minutes, systematically targeting every known defensive position with devastating accuracy. When it finally ceased, an ominous silence settled over the battlefield, broken only by the calls of wounded soldiers and the crackle of burning equipment. "Sniper position! Report status!" Colonel Martinez called through the radio, his transmission weak and distorted. "Position secure, no casualties," Sarah responded, though her voice shook slightly from the concussive effects of the nearby explosions. "Rifle operational, ready to engage." Williams was already scanning the approaches through his spotting scope, searching for the ground assault that would surely follow the artillery preparation. "Movement on all sectors," he reported urgently, multiple columns advancing simultaneously. Sarah swung her rifle toward the northern approach, where the heaviest enemy concentration appeared to be forming. Through her scope, she could see dozens of figures advancing in coordinated bounds, using cover and concealment with tactical proficiency that marked them as experienced fighters. "Priority targets," she muttered, identifying squad leaders and heavy weapons operators who were directing the advance. Her first shot dropped a figure carrying what appeared to be a portable anti-tank weapon, immediately disrupting the coordination of his squad. The enemy response was immediate and overwhelming. Machine gun fire raked the sniper position, while rifle teams attempted to suppress her with concentrated volleys. Sarah was forced to keep her head down as bullets whined overhead and struck the rocks around their hiding place. "I can't maintain effective observation," Williams reported, ducking as another burst of gunfire swept their position. Too much incoming fire. Sarah waited for a brief lull in the enemy fire before exposing herself long enough to engage another target. Her shot struck home, but the enemy immediately renewed their suppressive fire with increased intensity. The tactical situation was deteriorating rapidly. Without effective sniper support, the defensive positions were being overrun one by one. Radio communications reported breaches in the eastern perimeter and requests for immediate reinforcement that couldn't be fulfilled. "Sniper position, we need immediate fire support on the northern ridge," Rodriguez's desperate voice called through the static. "They've got a machine gun position that's pinning down our entire left flank." Sarah studied the indicated target through her scope, identifying the enemy machine gun team that was systematically destroying the defensive positions. The range was nearly 800 yards, and the enemy gunners were well protected behind improved fighting positions. "I see them," she confirmed, settling into position for what might be the most important shot of the entire engagement. One shot available before I'm forced to relocate. The enemy machine gun was devastating the defensive line, its heavy-caliber rounds penetrating the makeshift bunkers and forcing the defenders to abandon their positions. If it wasn't eliminated quickly, the entire northern flank would collapse. Sarah took extra time to ensure perfect sight alignment, knowing that missing this shot could cost the lives of every man in her unit. The wind was steady, the range was calculated precisely, and her breathing was controlled despite the chaos surrounding their position. The rifle fired with its characteristic sharp crack, and through the scope, Sarah watched the enemy machine gunner collapse forward over his weapon. The devastating fire immediately ceased, giving the defensive positions a crucial reprieve. "Target neutralized," Williams shouted over the noise of battle. "Outstanding shot!" But their position was now completely compromised. Enemy forces had identified their location and were directing concentrated fire against the sniper hide. Bullets struck the rocks around them in a continuous stream, making it impossible to maintain effective observation or engagement. "We need to displace," Williams urged, gathering essential equipment while staying low. "They know exactly where we are." Sarah reluctantly abandoned the carefully prepared position, carrying her rifle and essential ammunition, while Williams grabbed the radio and spotting equipment. They moved quickly along a concealed route toward a secondary position that had been prepared for exactly this situation. The new position offered a different angle of observation but was hastily constructed and lacked the protection of the primary hide. As they settled into the new shooting stance, Sarah could see that the battle was reaching its critical phase. Enemy forces were advancing on all fronts, overwhelming the defensive positions through sheer numbers and firepower. Several bunkers had been destroyed, and gaps were appearing in the defensive line that couldn't be filled with the remaining personnel. "Sniper position to command," Sarah called through the radio. "Displaced to secondary position, ready to resume fire support." "Understood," came the colonel's strained reply. "Target priority is the eastern approach where they're attempting to break through. Stop that advance at all costs." Sarah turned her attention to the eastern sector, where enemy assault troops were advancing through the gaps created by their artillery bombardment. The range was moderate, around 500 yards, but the targets were moving rapidly and using available cover effectively. She began engaging the assault force systematically, prioritizing leaders and heavy weapons operators who were coordinating the advance. Each shot was aimed with desperate precision, knowing that her ammunition was nearly exhausted and every round had to count. Williams proved invaluable in identifying targets and calling out threats, his steady voice providing crucial information that allowed Sarah to engage effectively, despite the chaotic battlefield conditions. "Squad leader at 10 o'clock, range 450, he called out, pointing toward a figure directing an assault team through a gap in the defensive wire. Sarah's shot dropped the target immediately, causing the assault team to hesitate and seek cover as they lost their leadership. The psychological impact of accurate sniper fire was multiplying her effectiveness far beyond the simple mathematics of individual kills. As the sun began to set, painting the desert in shades of orange and red, the intensity of the battle reached its peak. Enemy forces had committed their reserves in a final push to overrun the defensive positions before darkness could provide cover for the defenders. "All positions! This is it!" Colonel Martinez announced through the radio. "Hold your ground and make every shot count. Help is on the way, but we need to hold for another hour." Sarah had 12 rounds of match-grade ammunition remaining when the final enemy assault began. The concentrated attack involved nearly 100 hostiles advancing simultaneously from multiple directions, attempting to overwhelm the defensive positions through sheer numbers. She engaged targets of opportunity with mechanical precision, each shot carefully aimed to disrupt the enemy coordination. Squad leaders, heavy weapons operators, and communication personnel fell to her accurate fire, causing confusion and hesitation in the enemy ranks. Williams maintained a steady stream of target information, while monitoring radio communications that brought increasingly desperate reports from the defensive positions. Ammunition was running critically low across all sectors, and casualties were mounting steadily. "Last magazine," Sarah announced grimly, inserting her final rounds of precision ammunition into the rifle. 8 shots remaining. The enemy was close enough now that she could hear their voices as they coordinated their final assault. The defensive positions were barely holding against the overwhelming pressure. and everyone understood that the next few minutes would determine the outcome of the entire engagement. Sarah made her final shots count, each one aimed with the precision and patience her grandfather had taught her years ago in the Montana wilderness. When her last round was fired, an unexpected silence settled over the battlefield. Then Williams grabbed her arm and pointed toward the eastern horizon, where a line of vehicles was approaching at high speed, their dust clouds visible for miles across the desert floor. "Cavalry's here," he grinned, relief evident in his voice as the reinforcements arrived just in time to turn the tide of battle. In the aftermath, as medical teams treated the wounded and supply vehicles replenished their ammunition, Colonel Martinez found Sarah sitting quietly beside her rifle, methodically cleaning the weapon despite her obvious exhaustion. "Chen," he said simply, "you saved this unit. Your shooting turned what could have been a complete disaster into a tactical victory." Sarah looked up at him with those same quiet, serious eyes that had first caught his attention. "Just did my job, sir. Same as everyone else." But they both knew it was more than that. Sometimes, when everything depends on it, the quiet ones step forward and change the course of history with nothing more than skill, courage, and an unwavering determination to protect the people they care about.